I'm Agnieszka Niemark, and this is the Boyce Thompson Institute Centennial Oral History Project. It's May 4th, 2023. My interviewee today is Professor Zohara Yaniv Bachrach. Zohara joined BTI as a postdoctoral research fellow in 1967 and worked at BTI as a scientist between 1968 and 78. In 1978, when BTI moved from Yonkers, New York to Ithaca, upstate New York, Zohara decided to move back to Israel, her country of origin, and she became a senior scientist at the newly established Department of Medicinal Plants at the Agriculture Research Center in Bet Dagan in Israel. She held that position until her retirement in 2004. Zohara is joining me today via Zoom from her place in Tel Aviv. Zohara, thank you so much for accepting the invitation to join the Centennial Project.
Well, the pleasure is all mine.
Thank you. So, as I mentioned in the introduction, I know that you were born in Israel, but if you could start by telling us a little bit about your background and how come you decided to study biology or botany in the first place?
Okay. I was born in Tel Aviv and I went to high school, and I also belonged to a youth movement like the Scouts. And at the end of my high school, I was supposed to join the army, and we had a possibility, rather than just being a soldier, to join a kibbutz that was on the border. And so we were in a kibbutz, but in the meantime, we also were defending the country. And in this kibbutz, which was very much south, it was 40 kilometers north of Eilat, which is our most southern point. It was a complete desert. By the way, now it became a very successful kibbutz. It's called Yotvata. They cultivate their cows, and it's one of the highest production of milk products, like chocolate milk and all kinds of milk products. It's very famous, the Yotvata milk products. But at that time, there was nothing there. And my job was somehow to add some color to the place and to try to bring flowers. So I began to try to see what will survive in the desert. Even though we had water, we had salty water, but we could choose all kinds of plants, mainly plants that can adapt to the environment. And that really fascinated me. So at the end of my army service, I went to the university. And by the way, my mother is a dentist, and she wanted very much that I will continue her profession. And I did pass the entrance exams for medical school, which is always very hard. It was hard then, it is very hard even now. So I was allowed to study medicine, but I did prefer to study botany. So I did study botany and biochemistry, and I got my first degree and my bachelor and my master's degree. And at that point, I decided to go to the States. People were talking about opening your horizon, and I had a possibility, so I applied to Columbia University, to the Department of Plant Biochemistry. And so I moved to Columbia and studied and got my PhD there.
Zohara, so just for the record, I wanted to mention that you studied at the Hebrew University between 57, 62, and you decided then to continue your education in the States. Can you tell us how was the transition? Was it easy at the time to get, enrolled in the PhD studies, or was that difficult for you? Was that a challenge?
Well, it was a challenge because the authorities of Columbia University didn't want automatically to accept the fact that I had my master's already. They told me, for us, you have only your bachelor. And all your courses will be hanging there. And during your first year of your studies, you have to prove yourself and to get at least A or A+. And after that, if you do get A and A+, we'll consider you worthy of transferring your courses for the masters. And unfortunately, though this first course was a course of the botany of plants of the United States of America, and it involved a lot of memorizing. I don't know how today they are doing it, if the students still have to memorize, but I had to memorize so many family names and the structure of the flower and the structure of the leaves and so on, but I managed to do it. So after that first very hard year, my records were transferred and I continued to my PhD.
So it seems that your grades were very good because at some point towards the end of your PhD studies, you were noticed by people. And among these people, it seems that it was Richard Staples from BTI. I just wanted to mention here that the BTI encouraged some of his graduate students to enroll in the PhD studies at Columbia and at Cornell already from the 1950s. So I think there was a connection established between the two institutions, and this is why probably Richard Staples noticed you as a student. Could you tell us how his proposal for you to join the BTI happened? What happened?
Well, he did offer me to be a postdoc in his laboratory, and I liked it very, very much, and I accepted it. But then after a month, we decided I was pregnant at that time, at the beginning of my pregnancy. It was my first pregnancy. So I said it would be only fair if I tell him in advance that within few months I will have to be away for a short time. I decided it will be only a short time. And he came to us for dinner. And at the dinner, I told him, look, Dick, that's how we called him. I'm pregnant now. It's only the beginning, but I'm very serious about my research. So it will not stop me. I didn't get my PhD just to quit everything and to become a housewife and a mother. I will arrange everything, and I will arrange some way to take care of the baby. So he believed me, and he told it to Professor McNew, who was the head of the institute. And Professor McNew told him, and according to him, to Dick, he told me, he said, wow, I am afraid that you did a mistake. You're losing your postdoc. She will not come back. How can she? Her first pregnancy and her first baby. So Dick told me, and I said, don't worry, everything will be okay. And I felt so good after the delivery that I came back within 2 weeks, because I did find some very good Italian elderly woman to take care of the baby. Clementina, her name was. My children remember her until today because they still like spaghetti very much from those times. And after 2 weeks, when I came back to the institute, Dr. McNew was full of happiness. He was so happy to see me coming back, to the extent that after a few weeks, there was some meeting in his office talking about talking about women and whether or not women are equal to men, and if the institute gives equal opportunities. And he told them, look, this is Zohara. She's from another country. She's a foreigner. She's a woman. She's Jewish. And she's a new mother, but yet she's here. So he made me very proud.
So you were a good example of diversity among the scientific staff at BTI already in late 60s, right? In 1967.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the scientific side of your cooperation with Dick Staples. You told me that he proposed that you join the project that he was leading in the field of physiology of parasitism. And I just wanted to mention here that in the late 50s, the BTI started to get the first awards from the government agencies of US Public Health and National Science Foundation. And among the grants received by the BTI was a grant that Dick Staples received already first time in 64-66 with Dr. Owens, and they work on biochemistry of Rust-host relationship. And this, they continue to apply for the grants in this field. And it seems by 1966-69, you became part of one of these projects that received a considerable grant. And you studied together with Dick Staples, Dr. Wynn, protein synthesis in uredospore of bean rust. Could you tell us a little bit more about this main research project that you joined, and you became soon one of the leaders on this project?
It was a very interesting project. The whole idea to study a parasite like the rust, who is in what we call obligate parasite. Obligate parasite is a parasite that must have the host. It cannot just grow on water or on something. It needs a living host on it. So the interesting thing was to study the biochemistry of a parasite. What happens to the parasite if it only lands on water? What stops the biochemistry of it? Does it have a protein synthesis like a normal plant, or it's a different one? And we did find that it's a different protein synthesis and a different DNA synthesis, and we were able to isolate few key enzymes and to show the dependency of this parasite and how the surface of the leaf triggers the germination of the spore, and so that the spore, which is like the seed of the rust fungus, the spore can germinate and can begin its penetration into the leaf, and therefore the whole biochemistry is aimed to be successful on this process. So I think it was a very important point of view, because nobody knew why there is a parasite and what makes it so depending on the host. And when it has the host, it's so important, and it's so virulent, and it's so dangerous actually for the host, and becomes a real disease of the host.
Can you give us a sense how innovative this work was in comparison to other fields at BTI? I think you mentioned to me that it was some kind of research that preceded molecular biology, because you looked into cells at that point. Can you tell us about the quality of the laboratory work, and in general, give us a sense how innovative it was at the time?
Well, only later I found out how innovative it was, only when you look back at it, because molecular biology was just beginning, and to be able to isolate enzymes and to study everything in a cell-free system, and to be able to do very accurate, even though it's a plant and you can go to the field and do field work, but then after the field, you go back to the laboratory and you open the plants and you begin to study the processes and what happens. And we did publish, I think, about 15 papers, and we published some chapters in books, and we were invited to many national conferences, and we're giving our lectures about the different stages. Every stage was proceeding from the previous stage. So it was a very satisfying research. Not only, I mean, to me as a scientist, it was very rewarding.
So I could see, Zohara, that between 1970 and 73, you became, together with Dick Staples, the only leader on this project, on the second grant that you received on the same research project. But by 1974, after this very close collaboration with Dick Staples, situation started to change, because then Dr. Wellman became the managing director at the Institute, and he wanted to move BTI towards also international cooperation and international programs. And as I understood, Dick Staples was one of the people that Dr. Wellman really pushed forward to develop this kind of cooperation. Mm-hmm. Could you tell me how your work was affected by that? Did you continue the same research, or you remember doing a different project at the time?
I really don't think it changed our research, because the research had the pace of its I think Dick Staples added some more sites, the different sites like the effect of environment and the effect of stress and different aspects, but I was still doing my biochemical studies of the changes in cell-free system, what happens to the biochemistry of protein synthesis and DNA synthesis. I don't think that the different aspects, I became more independent because he was doing a larger scale of work, and I was collaborating with other scientists, but my own line was not really affected to the extent that I can tell you about a switch in the research, not really.
And I could see also that in the 1970s, apart from your research work, you got quite involved in the educational grants programs sponsored by the National Science Foundation. So already in the 1960s, BTI received the first educational grants, and that means the grants for teaching the high school teachers at BTI during the summer programs. And also at some point from 62, they started to teach high school students, the honor thesis students. Could you tell us about your involvement as instructor first and then as director of the program?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was not involved in the part with the teachers, only with the students, but it was a delightful part, really, because those young people were chosen based on their interest in science. And they came and they were very curious, and whatever was done, whatever they were given to do, they did, very enthusiastically. And those active minds really affected me very much. I was with them. I was like a child, like them. I was, especially during those years that I was the leader of the program, that I could see how they spread out in the different labs and how they were later on exchanging their impressions and their questions that they had. And only later on, I got a letter only a few years ago about one of them who got the Nobel Prize. Do you know who he is? I forgot his name. I have it in my notes, but he got the Nobel Prize, one of the scientists, and he was remembering the times as an NSF student science training program at the NIH during my time. So
that's amazing. We can, Zara, definitely find out who that was and add to the transcript of the interview his name.
I have the name. I can't remember it, but just before I found out, I think Alan Renwick told me, or somebody else wrote to me, that it's a great honor. And the man himself, the Nobel Prize winner, talked about it and talked about his impressions of those years at BTI.
Could you tell us how big was the group of students that were doing this summer program? How many of them were coming to BTI?
There were between 20 and 30, if I'm not mistaken, not more.
Yes.
And it was very hard to control them.
Yeah, the program continued for many years during the 60s and the 70s. So it was a very nice outreach and, educational program.
In fact, one of the big photographs that are now at the site of BTI in Yonkers, one of the big photographs shows the group of students, and I'm there on the corner. I saw it in 2017 when I visited the newly recovered site of BTI in Yonkers. I saw this huge photograph with the students, and I'm there in the corner wearing a white shirt. Maybe we can get the picture later on.
Zohara, what could you tell us about social life in Yonkers at BTI? I will just tell you that many of the interviewees mentioned this kind of very family-like sort of atmosphere of work at the Institute, and also that there were no differences between people who were, scientists and technicians, that people, were gathering together and doing different things together. Tell us how it was for you to be a young mother who joined BTI in the late 60s and what you remember from the social side of your work.
No, I remember it. People were very, very friendly. First of all, during the everyday life, we had book clubs and we had seminars and we were meeting for lunch and we had many discussions, even with different groups. And also on vacations, we used to have picnics in the grounds not far away from there. And there was another picnic site, I forgot the name, where we had a lake and we used to bring our children and meet each other. Very, very friendly, very, very friendly atmosphere. If I was sick, people would call me up and say, what happened to you? And, very interested in what's happening. And we shared happiness and we shared sad events with our colleagues. Very, very nice. In addition, during my free time at lunchtime, I would also like to walk. Even now, I like to walk. It's one of the activities I hold on very strongly since early years. So I would walk around the institute, and across the institute, there was some very old, like a palace. And in that palace that used to belong also to the state, there was a swimming pool. And we were allowed to swim there. It was a tiny little swimming pool inside the building. And we used to come and swim during lunchtime or after work and come back. So very, very nice.
Yeah, BTI had many properties that were close to BTI, including the golf club and the Hudson River by the Hudson River. So it was a nice place.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah. Zohara, so let's talk about your last years at BTI around 1977, 78. So already by 1974, the Institute started to make plans slowly to move outside Yonkers. There were many factors that, influenced these decisions, but you probably knew about this. Could you tell us what you decided to do when the Institute, when it was clear that the Institute will be moving to Ithaca, upstate New York?
Well, at that time, I began thinking about my future, my husband's future, and the future of my children. And since it involved to move away, I think if we didn't move, if we continue, maybe I would have stayed in the States. But moving from New York, where my husband used to work with the Israeli television, and moving away to Ithaca and taking my children away, we decided maybe we'll check how things are. And I asked for a half a year of absence, and I went to the Weizmann Institute in 1976, I think, only for 6 months to try as a sabbatical, like an American sabbatical coming to Israel. And they allowed it, and I did some work there, and I began to look for a job to see if I can find a place for me to work. And I liked it, so I decided that moving to Ithaca will be the signal for me to go back home and let my children get educated like an Israelis and not like Americans detached from their tradition. So we did it. It was not easy. Moving back after so many years, I combine my years at Columbia plus the 10, 11 years at BTI, it was a big move. It was not easy to move. As people know, people who move from one country to another, they know that it's not very easy, but it was good.
Zohara, so you mentioned to me that after your sabbatical, you still came back to Yonkers in early 1978. And before the Institute moved to Ithaca around August that year, you took a course on herbal plants at the Bronx Botanical Garden.
Right.
Could you tell us about this experience and how this influenced your decision about your work in Israel? What was the connection between plant studies and what you did afterwards?
Well, it was really a very interesting experience. I took a course on herbal medicine in the Bronx Botanical Garden, and the teacher was an old herbalist, botanist, who worked at the Botanical Garden, and the garden has a wonderful library, and one of the books, the more valuable books that they had in library was it's called a book by a Sicilian herbalist by the name of Dioscorides from the 1st century. It was written in the 1st century. The original book is from the 5th century, and only in the Bronx Botanical Garden in Vienna, you have these 2 original copies from the 5th century, and it involves so many beautiful drawings of the plants, and the herbalist gave us such an interesting lectures about the tradition of the plants and some of their active compounds and what they can do for medicine and how they were used in all times. So I was really fascinated by this. And when I came back to Israel, I had a choice. I was really very lucky. I had a choice because the head of the institute, the Agriculture Research Center, who accepted me, told me that I can automatically go to the Institute of Plant Protection because of my experience as a scientist who worked on plant diseases. But if you want something else, he told me, I will, since you are a returning scientist and we want to encourage our scientists to be happy back to Israel because maybe the conditions in Israel are not as good as you were used to them in the States, you should walk around the institute and see all other possibilities. And I ask you for 2 things. One, you have to tell me how you can contribute to this other department, other subject. And the other requirement is that the head of the department will tell me how he can use you, why you and not other person. So I looked around and just opened a department of medicinal plants. It just opened in the early 80s, in 1978, 79, just the beginning. And the head of the department was an agronomist. He knew how to grow plants. And the other scientist was a geneticist. He knew how to study genetics. And they looked for plant biochemists. So they said, come join us. So that's the rest of it is history. But what I did study at Boyce Thompson was very, very important. It really was very important. It's the way you do research, it's the way you think about different processes that happen, why they happen, how they do it. It really helped me a lot. It's not that one switches subject all the way to the other side and do something different. No, a scientist can use the crafts and the way of thinking that they got. And these were my early years as a scientist at Boyce Thompson. And they really, I can tell you now that they really influenced me very, very much.
Yes, so I'm glad, that the quality of research at BTI helped you establish yourself as a scientist, because that even with the change from biochemistry to medicinal plants more broadly was probably quite a useful experience. Zohara, could you tell us a little bit more about contacts with people that you work closely in a professional sense? Did you establish any close relationships? Did you continue to be in touch with people after you moved to Israel? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, not really. I mean, with Dick Staples, yes, very much. We kept corresponding very much, and he came a few times to Israel. He had another connection with another Meyer, a Hebrew scientist at the Hebrew U, that he continued to be in touch with, and he came to us and Meyer came to him. So every time he came, we were still in touch for quite a few years, until almost the very end. But the other scientist, the other scientists, we had Ramakrishna, the scientist from India that I didn't stay in touch with, and Mako, the Hungarian, that I didn't stay in touch with. Not too many. Sorry.
And people from the other fields, I thought also the environmental program.
Right, Len Weinstein and his group, who were still keeping in touch, yes.
Yeah. Zohara, and did you have a chance to visit Yonkers or Ithaca in the years, when you already moved to Israel later on?
Well, I was invited by Dick Staples in 1986 or 87, I think it was 86, to give a seminar. And so I came all the way to Ithaca. I think it was winter and everything was covered with snow. And he asked me to give a seminar about something that I was working on at that time in Israel. And I was working on the evening primrose, which has a very interesting combination of oils in the seeds. It has an omega-6 and omega-3, very special fatty acids that are important for our health. And he asked me to give a talk about the role of special fatty acids in plant life and for human nutrition, and giving the evening primrose as an example. So I gave this lecture and I met Mildred, his wife, and I walked around the Institute very much. And I was thinking to myself that it's not the last time that maybe I will come again, but until now, I didn't have the chance to come again.
Hopefully there will be some centennial celebrations and you might be able to join. Zohara, and did you mention that you also visited Yonkers at some point when the Institute wasn't there anymore?
Mm-hmm. I was wondering what happened to this beautiful institute, and I heard that it was destroyed and rebuilt again. So I made an effort in 2017 when I was in New York for other reasons, and I was accepted by a woman, I can't remember her name, but I have it, and she took me around, and Alan Renwick arranged it, and I had a special visit there, and I was very impressed. The color of the walls, those red bricks, the whole site of the place, the library, the different corridors, the pictures. It was really a wonderful, wonderful reminder, because the site itself didn't change that much. I mean, the country is still such a green country, such beautiful country, so different from Manhattan. And all those memories came back to me. So it was really an emotional visit, very much so.
That's beautiful. Zara, tell us a few words about your research on medicinal plants, because I understand that you spent many years after BTI working on that in this field, that you published in book in this discipline. Could you tell us about, how this field of studies evolved throughout the years? I know medicinal plants becoming more and more important, right, recently. Tell us a little bit about your research.
Okay, the first part of the research was really what we call today an ethnobotany. It was supported by the Ministry of Health in Israel, where they found out we don't really know about the traditions of medicinal plants in Israel. So we arranged a whole group of experts, including people who knew Arabic, and we went around, and this took about 10 years. It was not the main research, but it was a continuing research to go to the different villages around Israel, from the very north to the very south. And at that time, it was Sinai. It was all the way in Sinai, because we still had Sinai at that time. And we were interviewing healers and collecting native plants and asking the healers in a scientific way questions that could become the basis of research later on, questions that led us not only what is this plant doing, but what part of the plant is the active part, and when do you collect it, and where do you collect it, what is the special environment that it grows on, and if it's in the leaves or in the flowers or in the roots. All these are very important information that later on you can look for the active ingredients and try them. So that was the basis of a book that was published, which is called the Medicinal Plants of the Holy Land, which is still being used. It was published again and again, and it's still being used in Israel. And the rest of the research was among the question of the effect of environment on the quality of medicinal plants, which people don't understand, that you just take garlic or whatever other plants, echinacea, what other plants, and you just use them. No, you have to know who picked them up, how they were arranged, and if you want to grow them, you have to find the best places to grow them, the best conditions. Like for instance, the question of the evening primrose was a very important question. They wanted us to grow the evening primrose in Israel so that this unusual fatty acid will be the best quality. Not much was needed. Only about 8 or 9% of the total fats had to be this what we call the gamma-linolenic acid. But in Israel, it was no good, because the season where this plant was growing, it was always too hot, and the plant is this plant is very sensitive to temperature. So after a few years of research, and I was in charge of a student who did her master's on it, the result was that only under artificial conditions you can grow it in Israel in a greenhouse, when you keep everything cool. But if you really want to cultivate it the way it will be the best for the evening primrose, for the oil, you have to do it either in England or in Canada, or in a place where the temperature never goes up, even in the summer, above 20 degrees. But you had to dig into the biochemistry and see what really the heat is doing. And this is the part of biochemistry that I took from BTI, to know the differences in enzymes, what enzymes are affected by the heat, and why do they need cold, and so on and so forth. So it was really an example of the kind of research we did.
Zohara, and are you active until today professionally? Because I have seen that you are still a board member on the Volcani Center. Could you tell us what you are doing as Professora Emerita? What's happening?
Well, I'm really lucky as a retired person. I'm really lucky. I'm also the president of the Israeli Association of Medicinal Plants, which is an association to promote the knowledge of medicinal plants in Israel. And I was we created this group in 2003, and now I'm the president of it. But in addition, I'm still teaching. I'm teaching in the School of Nutrition of the Hebrew University, so that the future dietitian will know something about medicinal plants. They have to know they're not only a diet, but they have to know what other plants are needed, because the public wants to know. Because people are more and more knowledgeable. They have the internet, and they have Google, and they read in the newspapers, and they want to know what they should do for their health. So there is very much interest. And I also give lectures in the public to people who know. Only on Monday, there was a conference for a whole day about nutrition and health in the Yemenite Jews who came to Israel, the Yemenite who came from Yemen. So I was invited to give a lecture there to see what happened to the Yemenites from Yemen. And they had a very good diet before they came here. But once they came here to a Western country and they eat too much sugar and too much carbohydrates, then they have more diabetes than before and more diseases. So I'm still very active.
It's wonderful to hear that you are still active and you can do work in your field of studies. Could you tell us at the end what you consider as the most important discoveries in the medicinal plant studies over the last few years, where this field is today?
Wow. Wow, that's a difficult question. I think people now want to know, okay, there are traditions, but they want now evidence-based medicine. They want to know what is the evidence, what is the science behind. So we follow the science behind the plants. And we are trying to see, if you take, for example, cannabis. Cannabis is a big issue in Israel now, medical cannabis. And you take this cannabis as an example. It's very hard. It's very hard to take a medicinal plant. It's much easier if you take heroin, or you take morphine, if you take opium. Opium has morphine, heroin, all kinds of other compounds. But cannabis, as a plant, it has 240 cannabinoids. So if you want to develop a medical cannabis, it's good for hyperactivity, or for pain, or for not being able to sleep. Or so you develop different varieties, and you follow different typical concentrations of the active compounds, but all the rest in the background, it's very hard to control them. So you cannot just take any wild plants and say, I know evidence-based, I know how to make it like a medicine that the doctors and the conventional medicine can use. It's not so easy. It's not so easy. So
the biochemistry still play a role in all of that, right?
The biochemistry and the different relations inside the plant. You see, there are people who believe that it's not good to take just one compound from the plant, because in the plant there are so many other compounds that support it and prevent side effects. So there is a whole group of people who believe that you should always stay with an extract that has more than one compound that will support the rest of the activities and make them less toxic. And some other people want just clean active compound, like a medicine that you can put in the bottle and have it in the closet for medicine. So it's not easy, because you're dealing with plants, and plants are living organisms, and they have many compounds, and they have the different periods where the compounds are more active, and different periods when the compounds are less active. So it's a very challenging field, I would say.
Okay. Zohara, thank you so much for sharing your story about your work at BTI, and also sharing your insight related to medicinal plants discipline and other things. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you very much for the interview. It was very interesting. Thank you. Thank you very much.